Laura Whitaker woke before the alarm, the way she always did on important mornings. The house was still dark, quiet except for the low hum of the furnace and the distant rattle of wind against the windows. Outside, snow pressed softly against the glass, fresh and untouched. Winter had arrived properly overnight, as if on cue for their long-planned vacation. She moved through the kitchen on instinct, starting coffee, packing sandwiches, counting jackets by the door. Years of managing mornings with 3 children had given her a steady rhythm. Nothing felt rushed, even though everything had to be done quickly. She worked with the calm efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much time she had before the house would wake. Jacob came down first, already dressed, his backpack slung over one shoulder. At 13, he had grown into a quiet reliability Laura leaned on more than she admitted. He checked his phone, frowned at the weather forecast, then looked up at her. "Looks cold everywhere," he said. "That's winter," Laura replied, smiling. "That's the point." Hannah followed, hair still damp from a hurried shower, complaining half-heartedly about airport food. Lucas trailed behind them, dragging his small rolling suitcase, announcing that he would behave perfectly on the plane if it meant getting hot chocolate afterward. Laura laughed and promised nothing. By the time they locked the door, the house felt briefly hollow, like it always did when they left together. Laura took one last glance at the entryway, coats lined up, boots drying on the mat, and then ushered the children toward the car. The drive to the airport passed in fragments of conversation. Jacob argued with Hannah about which movie they would watch on the flight. Lucas pressed his face to the window, counting snowplows. Laura listened without interrupting, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting lightly on her purse. She did not think about Robert. Not yet. At Des Moines International Airport, the warmth and noise wrapped around them all at once. Rolling suitcases hummed across the floor. Announcements echoed overhead. Laura joined the check-in line, documents ready, her mind already moving through the next steps: security, boarding, settling the kids. When the agent frowned at the screen, Laura noticed immediately. "There seems to be an issue with the ticket times," the woman said, tapping the keyboard again. "I'm seeing a discrepancy in the check-in window." Laura leaned closer, her earlier calm tightening just slightly. She had checked everything twice. Robert always said she worried too much, but she had learned that details mattered. Another agent came over, then a supervisor. The conversation shifted low and professional, words like system error and incorrect entry floating just out of reach. Laura felt the familiar pull of irritation, but she kept her voice even. As they waited, snow thickened outside the large windows. The departure board flickered. One by one, flights began to change status. Delayed, canceled. When their flight finally appeared in red, Laura exhaled slowly. The supervisor explained that worsening weather combined with the ticket error meant there would be no departure that day. Rebooking would take time, possibly days. Hannah groaned. Lucas asked if this meant they were never going anywhere again. Jacob stayed quiet, watching Laura's face. "We're going home," Laura said after a moment. Her voice surprised even her with how steady it sounded. "We'll figure something else out." On the way back to the car, the children complained less than she expected. Disappointment settled into something dull and manageable. Snow fell harder now, softening the edges of the city. As Laura drove, her phone buzzed in her purse. Robert. She assumed he would be expecting a message by now, something about boarding, about delays. Her fingers brushed the edge of the purse, then moved away. She pictured his reaction if they walked through the door instead. His surprise, the way he would smile, maybe laugh, say something about fate. It seemed harmless, almost comforting. "I'll tell him when we get there," she decided silently. In the back seat, the children had begun to plan an imaginary version of the vacation they were no longer taking. Lucas suggested building snow forts. Hannah argued for baking instead. Jacob listened, nodding, already adjusting. Laura watched the road ahead, snow blurring the familiar landmarks. The house waited for them, warm and ordinary, exactly where they had left it that morning. None of them knew that by the end of the day, that ordinary life would no longer exist. The house felt wrong the moment Laura stepped inside. It was not anything obvious at first. No broken furniture, no noise, no sign of intrusion, but a subtle disorder that unsettled her immediately. A child's boot lay on its side near the hallway instead of neatly paired by the rack. A scarf she did not recognize was draped over the back of a chair. The air carried a faint warmth, as if someone had been there recently and left in a hurry. "Did Dad come back early?" Hannah asked, setting her suitcase down. "Maybe," Laura said, though the word came out without conviction. Jacob frowned, already scanning the room with the quiet alertness Laura had begun to recognize in him. The house was too still, too silent in the wrong way. The television was off. No music, no familiar background sounds. Lucas, impatient to shed his coat, slipped past them and ran down the hall. "I'm going to wash my hands," he called out, already reaching for the bathroom door. "Lucas, wait," Laura started. The door swung open before she could finish the sentence. For a fraction of a second, Laura did not understand what she was seeing. Steam fogged the mirror. Water lapped softly against porcelain. And in the bathtub, rising sharply in surprise, was a naked woman, her hair dark and wet, her skin flushed, flower petals floating around her like a grotesque parody of calm. The woman gasped. Laura froze. Time stretched, thin and unreal. Laura's mind rejected the image, even as her eyes continued to register every detail. This was her bathroom, her tub, the shelf with her shampoo bottles. Nothing had been moved, nothing rearranged enough to explain away what stood before her. The woman stammered, clutching at the edge of the tub. "Who are you?" Laura heard herself answer, though it felt like someone else was speaking. "This is my house." Behind her, she sensed movement. Jacob and Hannah had come closer, drawn by the sudden silence. Laura did not turn. She raised one hand, slightly, a wordless command for them to stay where they were. The woman in the tub stared at her, confusion shifting into something like fear. And then the front door opened. Footsteps crossed the threshold. A familiar male voice hummed lightly, off-key as if in a good mood. Laura heard the soft clink of glass against glass. "Laura." Robert called. She turned slowly. Robert stood in the hallway, his coat unbuttoned, a bottle of champagne dangling casually from one hand. He stopped when he saw them, his wife, pale and unmoving, the children frozen behind her. The smile did not leave his face immediately. It faded in stages, as though his mind were trying to catch up with his eyes. "What are you all doing here?" he asked. The question itself was absurd. Laura did not answer. She nodded once toward the bathroom. Robert followed her gaze. His shoulders stiffened. For a brief, flickering moment, something like calculation passed over his expression. Then he exhaled, slow and controlled. "So," he said, "you didn't leave." "No," Laura replied. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "We didn't." Silence pressed in around them, thick and suffocating. The woman in the bathtub shifted, water sloshing loudly, the sound obscene in its intimacy. Hannah sucked in a sharp breath behind Laura. Jacob's hand clenched at his side. "I thought you were already on the plane," Robert said at last. He lifted the champagne bottle slightly, as if noticing it for the first time. "I was just enough," Laura said. The word cut cleanly through the room. Robert stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her, really looked, and something hardened in his eyes. The truth had arrived without warning, without preparation. There was no story that could soften it, no explanation that could rearrange what stood plainly before them. A stranger in her bath. Her husband, holding champagne. Their children, standing in the hallway, witnessing it all. Laura felt heat rise to her face, not anger yet, not sorrow, but something closer to humiliation, sharp and immediate. This was not a private betrayal discovered late at night. This was exposure. Spectacle. "Get out of the tub," Laura said quietly, not to Robert, but to the woman. The woman hesitated, then nodded frantically, reaching for a towel. Laura finally turned to her children. "Stay here," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Don't move." Jacob nodded. Hannah swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the floor. Laura stepped back into the hallway, her legs moving on instinct. Somewhere deep inside, a line had been crossed so completely that there was no question of going back. The storm had arrived. The moment shattered all at once. The woman in the bathroom began to cry, loud and uncontrolled, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the towel. Water spilled over the edge of the tub, pooling on the tile. She kept repeating the same broken sentence. "I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know." As if the words could rearrange reality if she said them often enough. Robert sighed. It was not the sound of panic or remorse. It was irritation, the weary exhale of someone inconvenienced. "Please," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Can we not turn this into a scene?" Laura stared at him. The children stood behind her, motionless, as if their bodies had decided stillness was safer than reaction. Hannah's face had gone pale. Jacob's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on Robert with an intensity that made Laura's chest tighten. "A scene," Laura repeated. Robert straightened. He slipped the champagne bottle onto the hallway shelf with deliberate care, as though maintaining order in small things could restore control. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, almost reasonable. "You didn't have to come back like this," he said. "You could have waited. This would have resolved itself." The woman let out a sharp, hysterical laugh from the bathroom. "Resolved?" she shrieked. "You said you were getting a divorce." "I said we were having problems," Robert snapped, his patience thinning. "There's a difference." The woman surged out of the tub, clutching the towel to her chest. Her hair hung wet and heavy down her back, water dripping onto the floor as she advanced into the hallway. Her eyes locked onto Laura with sudden fury. "You knew," she accused. "You had to know. No woman is that blind." Laura felt the words land without impact, like hailstones bouncing off glass. She did not answer. She did not need to. "What are you doing?" Robert barked. "Get back in there." The woman ignored him. She took another step forward, then another, her voice rising unsteady and raw. "You told me you loved me. You told me you were waiting for the right moment. You said she understood, that she didn't care anymore." Robert turned sharply toward Laura. "You always did understand too much," he said. "That was your mistake." The sentence sliced through the room. Laura heard Hannah gasp. She felt Jacob shift behind her, closer now, protective without thinking. The children were no longer just witnesses. They were participants, dragged into a truth they had not been given the chance to avoid. "So that's it," Laura said quietly. "That's your explanation." Robert spread his hands, palms up. "I didn't think you'd make it so ugly. I thought you were wiser than that." Something inside Laura went cold and still. The last illusion dissolved, not of love, not even of loyalty, but of basic respect. He was not ashamed. He was offended. The woman suddenly screamed and rushed forward, slamming her shoulder into the bathroom door behind her as if to steady herself. The door frame rattled. She began pounding on it with her fist, her towel slipping, her words tumbling out in a torrent of rage and betrayal. "You lied to me," she sobbed. "You used me." "Stop it," Robert shouted. "Have you lost your mind?" She lunged again, the towel falling away, completely this time as the door gave under the repeated blows. She stumbled into the hallway, naked and unrestrained, her grief turning feral. Jacob moved instantly. Cover yourself, he yelled, stepping in front of Hannah and Lucas, his arms outstretched, shielding them. Hannah grabbed Lucas's face with both hands, pressing his head into her shoulder so he could not see. The sound that came from Laura's chest was not a scream. It was quieter than that, a sharp intake of breath, as if something essential had been knocked loose. Enough, Laura said. No one listened. The woman collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, her hair plastered to her face. Robert stood over her, furious now, humiliated in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with exposure. You've ruined everything, he shouted, to Laura, to the woman, to the room itself. Laura looked at her children. Lucas clung to Hannah, confused and frightened. Hannah's eyes were wet but focused, her jaw tight. Jacob stood rigid, his body angled protectively, no longer a boy in that moment, but something harder, older. That was when Laura made her decision. She did not argue. She did not ask questions. She did not demand explanations or apologies. She stepped forward, took Lucas gently from Hannah's arms, and placed one hand on Jacob's shoulder. Get your coats, she said. Her voice was steady. Final. Robert stared at her. Don't be dramatic. Laura met his eyes for the last time inside that house. I'm done. She turned away. The children followed without hesitation. No one stopped them. No one could. As the door closed behind them, the noise inside the house continued, crying, shouting, the crash of something breaking, but Laura did not look back. The break was complete. Laura drove without a clear destination in mind, her hands steady on the wheel even as everything else felt unmoored. The streets of Des Moines slid past the windshield, familiar intersections blurring into one another as if the city itself were quietly stepping aside. The house they had left behind might as well have vanished the moment the door closed. No one spoke at first. Lucas sat in the back seat, bundled into his coat, his small fingers wrapped tightly around the zipper. Hannah stared out the window, her reflection pale against the darkening sky. Jacob watched the road ahead over Laura's shoulder, silent, alert, as if making sure nothing followed them. The heater hummed softly. Snow began to fall again, light but persistent. Laura's phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She ignored it. At a red light several blocks from the house, she saw her in the rearview mirror, running, slipping slightly on the icy pavement, waving one bare hand above her head. The woman's coat hung open, her hair still damp, her face streaked with tears. "Mom," Hannah whispered. "That's her." Laura hesitated, her foot hovering over the brake. Every instinct told her to keep driving, to disappear into traffic and let the city swallow what it could not contain. But the light turned green, and instead of accelerating, Laura pulled over to the curb. The woman reached the car, gasping for breath. She bent down to the window, her hands trembling. "Please," she said, "please don't leave me here." Laura rolled the window down an inch. Cold air rushed in. "I don't have anywhere to go," the woman continued. "He told me he'd drive me back. I don't even know where I am." Jacob stiffened. Laura felt it through the seat, the tension radiating forward. "This isn't my problem," Laura said quietly. "I know," the woman replied, nodding desperately. "I know. There aren't any buses out here and my phone is dead. I'll sit in the back. I won't say a word. Please." Laura closed her eyes for a moment. She was tired in a way that went beyond shock or anger. Tired of scenes. Tired of cruelty. Tired of choosing between what was right and what was survivable. "Get in," she said. The woman climbed into the back seat, pulling her coat tightly around herself, shrinking as far away from the children as possible. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her sobs muted now, contained. They drove in silence for several minutes. Laura did not look at her. She gave an address when prompted, a suburb on the edge of the city, close enough that the buildings thinned and streetlights grew farther apart. When Laura pulled over, The woman hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know about the kids." Laura nodded once. "Don't do this again," she said. "Not with someone else's family." The woman flinched, then nodded. She stepped out into the cold, closing the door softly behind her. Laura waited until she disappeared into the darkness before pulling away. The car felt lighter without her, though nothing had truly been removed. "Where are we going?" Jacob asked after a while. Laura thought of hotels, of calling friends, of the long explanations that would follow. Then she thought of the farmhouse, empty, cold, forgotten, a place that belonged to no one and everyone at once. "We're going to my grandparents' place," she said. "Out in the country." Hannah frowned. "Isn't that far?" "Yes," Laura said, "but it's ours." The road narrowed as they left the city behind. Houses gave way to open fields buried under snow, fences half hidden, trees standing bare and patient. Laura felt something inside her loosen, just slightly. She did not know how long they would stay. She did not know what would come next. But for the first time since the airport, she had chosen a direction. And that for now was enough. They reached the farmhouse, well after dark. Laura turned off the main road onto a narrow, snow-covered lane that barely looked passable. The headlights cut two pale tunnels through the falling snow, revealing fence posts, drifts, and the uneven ruts of a path that had not seen regular use in years. When she finally stopped the car, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, the house loomed ahead of them, small, low, and shadowed, its windows dark. For a moment, no one moved. "This is it," Laura said, more to herself than to the children. Snow lay untouched around the house, rising almost to the steps. The porch sagged slightly, its paint peeled and weathered. The place did not look abandoned in the dramatic sense. No broken windows, no collapsed roof, but neglected, as if it had been patiently waiting and was no longer sure for whom. Jacob opened his door first. Cold rushed in immediately. "Stay in the car," he said to Hannah and Lucas, already pulling his hood up. "I'll clear a path." Laura watched him step into the snow, his boots sinking deep with each step. He grabbed the small shovel from the trunk and began working methodically, pushing snow aside to make a narrow trail from the car to the porch. He did not complain. He did not rush. He simply did what needed to be done. "You don't have to," Laura started. "I know," Jacob said without turning around, "but it'll be easier." She let him. By the time, she carried Lucas from the car. Jacob had cleared the steps and tested the porch boards with his foot. They creaked but held. Hannah followed carefully, clutching her coat closed, her breath visible in short, white clouds. The front door was locked. Laura fumbled in her pocket, her fingers stiff with cold, until she found the old key. It slid into the lock with surprising ease, turning on the first try. The door opened with a long, low groan. Cold poured out of the house, heavier than the night air outside. Inside, it smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly familiar. Dry, comforting, almost sweet. Laura stood just inside the doorway, her breath catching. The flashlight on her phone barely pierced the darkness, revealing outlines of furniture draped in sheets, a narrow hallway, the edge of a kitchen table. "Is it safe?" Hannah asked quietly. "Yes," Laura said. "It's just cold." Jacob moved past her, already setting his backpack down. "There should be a wood stove," he said, as if confirming a fact he had always known. Grandpa kept one. He was right. It stood in the corner of the main room, black and solid, its surface cold to the touch. Jacob opened the small metal door and peered inside. "I'll find wood," he said. "Outside." Hannah asked. Jacob nodded. "There's probably a shed." Laura watched him disappear back into the snow, a sudden ache rising in her chest. 13 years old, and already carrying more than he should. But she also felt something else. Relief, gratitude, a fragile sense that they were not entirely helpless. She set Lucas down gently on a chair, brushing snow from his hair. He leaned against her, already drowsy, his body warm beneath his coat. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're home." The word surprised her as soon as she said it. As Jacob worked outside, Laura moved through the house slowly, her flashlight guiding her steps. The furniture was exactly where she remembered it. The table her grandfather had built with his own hands still bore the shallow nicks from years of use. The cabinet door hung slightly crooked, just as it always had. Even the old rug by the sink was still there, threadbare but stubborn. Memories surfaced without warning. Her grandmother kneading dough at the counter, flour dusting the air, her grandfather humming as he fixed a loose chair leg, the sound of laughter on winter evenings when the house had been full and alive. The house did not welcome her. Not yet. It watched, silent and reserved, as if waiting to see whether she would stay or leave again. Jacob returned with an armful of firewood and a small pile of kindling. His cheeks were red with cold, his breath quick. "There's enough to get us through the night," he said. Together they built the fire. When the first flame caught, small and unsteady, Laura felt something loosen inside her. The stove began to tick and hum as it warmed, the heat slow but real. "We'll all sleep in one room," she said. "It'll be warmer." Jacob nodded. He spread coats and blankets on the floor, arranging them carefully. Hannah helped without being asked. Lucas curled up almost immediately, his eyes closing as soon as his head touched the makeshift bed. When everything was as settled as it could be, Laura sat down at the table and pressed her hands against the wood. It was rough beneath her palms, solid, real. The house was not kind. It was not gentle, but it was standing. And for the first time since they left the city, Laura allowed herself to believe that standing might be enough. The fire burned low by the time the house finally went quiet. Jacob had fallen asleep on the floor near the stove, one arm tucked beneath his head, his breathing deep and even. Hannah lay curled on the couch, her coat pulled up to her chin. Laura sat on the edge of the bed beside Lucas, listening to the faint whistle of wind slipping through the cracks in the window frames. The farmhouse creaked softly as it adjusted to the cold night, each sound amplified by the stillness. Laura reached out and brushed Lucas's hair back from his forehead. He murmured once, then settled again. Only when she was certain the children were asleep did Laura allow herself to sit back and breathe. She reached into her pocket for her phone. The screen lit up the room with a harsh, white glow. A single message waited for her. From Robert. She read it once without fully understanding the words. Then again, more slowly. "Since you've decided to behave so irrationally, I won't be indulging this nonsense. I've blocked all your cards and access to our accounts. When you calm down and realize you have no other option, we can talk. Until then, consider this a lesson." Laura stared at the screen. Her first reaction was disbelief. Thin and fragile. She checked her banking app, her fingers stiff as she typed in the familiar passwords. The numbers loaded, then disappeared. Access denied. She tried another card, then another. Nothing. The truth settled with a dull, crushing weight. No money. No cash. No account she could touch. The car she drove was registered in Robert's name. Even the phone bill ran through him. He had planned this. Laura lowered the phone to her lap and sat very still. The fire popped softly in the stove. Outside, snow continued to fall indifferent and steady. She lay back without undressing, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Sleep did not come. Instead, her mind began to work through the situation with quiet urgency. Food. They had some for now. Heat if the fire held. Beyond that, nothing. No income. No savings she could reach. No immediate help she could ask for without opening herself to questions she was not ready to answer. Robert was waiting for her to break. She could picture him, clearly, confident, certain that hunger and cold would do what humiliation alone could not. He expected her to call, to apologize, to return on his terms. The realization brought a sharp clarity. She would not. Laura stared at the ceiling, tracing the dark lines of old beams she remembered from childhood. The house had been poor, simple, often cold, but it had never belonged to anyone who could take it away from her with a message. Independence would not be graceful. It would not be dignified. It would mean asking for work she had never imagined herself doing. It would mean using her body, her hands, her time, until exhaustion replaced pride. The thought scared her. But beneath the fear, something steadier began to form. She had survived worse moments than this. She had carried children, raised them, held families together. She could learn to carry herself now. Laura turned her phone face down and closed her eyes. By morning, she would start looking for work. Not because she had been forced, but because she had chosen to stand on her own. Morning arrived without ceremony. Laura woke to the pale gray light of dawn pressing through the thin curtains, the fire in the stove reduced to glowing embers. For a moment, she lay still, listening. The house was quiet except for the soft rhythm of breathing around her and the distant creak of wood adjusting to the cold. There was no time to linger. She rose carefully, easing past Lucas and pulling on her coat. Outside, the snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world blank and muffled. The farmhouse stood alone against it, small but upright, as if bracing itself. Laura stepped onto the porch and drew a breath of cold air. It burned her lungs awake. By the time the children stirred, she had already made a decision. "There's a farm down the road," she said as they gathered around the table. Sipping weak tea warmed on the stove. "I'm going to see if they need help." Jacob nodded immediately. "I'll come with you." "No," Laura said gently. "You'll stay here. Help Hannah with Lucas. Then go talk to the neighbors." Jacob looked at her, reading between the words. "Snow clearing?" "Yes." He gave a short nod, already pulling on his boots. The walk to the farm was longer than Laura remembered, her city muscles protesting the uneven ground. The buildings came into view, slowly, low barns, a farmhouse with smoke rising from the chimney, chickens already moving in the yard. A man stood near the gate, his posture wary as she approached. She introduced herself simply, explained that she was staying nearby, that she was looking for work. He studied her hands, her coat, her shoes. His skepticism was open, unembarrassed. "This isn't easy work," he said, "and it doesn't pay much." "I know," Laura replied. "I can start today." There was a pause, then a shrug. "You can help in the dairy barn. Cash at the end of the day. Some food, too." Relief passed through her so sharply it nearly unbalanced her. The work was harder than she expected. Her arms ached. Her back burned. The cold seeped into her bones, despite the constant movement. She scrubbed, lifted, carried, followed instructions she had not heard spoken in years. At one point, her hands trembled so badly she had to stop and press them together, embarrassed by the weakness. She swallowed it down and kept going. Pride had no place here. By midday, her coat was damp with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. But when the farmer handed her a few bills and a carton of eggs at the end of the shift, Laura felt something settle inside her chest. It was not happiness. It was certainty. She walked back toward the farmhouse slower than she had left, every step heavy. Halfway there, she saw Jacob ahead of her, his shoulders bent beneath the weight of a shovel. He was clearing a neighbor's driveway, working steadily, snow flying in practiced arcs. The neighbor stood nearby, handing him a thermos. Jacob grinned when he saw her, the expression bright and fleeting. He held up a small bag when he finished, potatoes, bread, a wrapped piece of meat. "They paid me with food," he said. "Said cash later if I come back." Laura nodded, unable to trust her voice for a moment. Back at the farmhouse, Hannah had managed to get the stove going again. Lucas sat bundled near the warmth, coloring on the back of an old envelope. "We're okay," Hannah said quietly. It was not reassurance. It was a statement. That evening they ate simply. Eggs, bread, potatoes cooked directly on the stove. The food was plain, but it filled them in a way restaurant meals never had. Laura watched her children eat, their movements unhurried, their conversation tentative but real. No one mentioned the city. No one mentioned Robert. Later, as the fire crackled low again, Laura washed her hands in cold water and stared at them, reddened, cracked. Proof of the day. Shame flickered, brief, instinctive. She had never imagined herself here, working like this, counting eggs and potatoes. Then it faded. In its place was something quieter, stronger. They had eaten. They were warm. They would sleep under a roof. And tomorrow they would work again. Laura noticed something was wrong before Lucas said a word. He had been quiet all morning, sitting too close to the stove, his coloring forgotten in his lap. When she touched his cheek, the heat startled her. It was not the gentle warmth of sleep or lingering cold, but a sharp, unnatural fever that made her stomach tighten. "Lucas," she said softly, "can you take a breath for me?" He tried. The sound that came out was thin and ragged, followed by a cough that bent his small body forward. He whimpered and pressed his face into her coat. That was enough. They bundled him quickly, Jacob already pulling on his boots without being told. Hannah hovered near the door, pale and silent, clutching Lucas's hat in both hands. The drive to the nearest hospital felt endless. Snow blurred the edges of the road, and every cough from the back seat tightened Laura's grip on the steering wheel. Lucas burned against her arm, his breath shallow and uneven. At the emergency department, the warmth hit them all at once, harsh and artificial. Nurses moved quickly, practiced and efficient, their questions short and precise. Lucas was lifted onto a gurney, his small hand slipping from Laura's grasp. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm here," she said, walking alongside him. "I'm right here." They took him for x-rays, blood work, oxygen. Laura answered questions mechanically, her mind lagging behind the speed of events. She kept waiting for someone to say it was nothing, a bad cold, a mistake. The doctor did not soften his voice. "Pneumonia," he said. "He needs to be admitted." The words landed heavily. "How long?" Laura asked. "At least a few days. We'll start antibiotics immediately." Laura nodded. Her hands shook. When the paperwork came, reality closed in from all sides. Insurance, billing, consent forms. She signed where they pointed, knowing she could not fix what she could not control. A nurse pulled her aside. "You can stay with him tonight," she said gently, "but we need to know your plans going forward." Laura looked through the glass into Lucas's room. He lay curled beneath crisp white sheets, an oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. He looked impossibly small. "I have 2 other children," Laura said, "and a job. I just started." The nurse's expression shifted, not to judgment, but to understanding. "We see this more than you'd think." Laura's chest tightened painfully. She went back into the room and sat beside Lucas, taking his hand. His fingers were hot and damp. His eyes fluttered open when she spoke. "They're helping you breathe," she said. "That's good." "Will you stay?" he asked. Laura swallowed. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. "I can't stay tonight," she said carefully, "but I'll come back as soon as I can." His lower lip trembled. "Promise." "I promise," she said, even as her heart fractured at the word. Leaving the room was the hardest thing she had ever done. The hallway stretched endlessly, bright and impersonal. The sound of machines and distant voices echoed off the walls, each step amplifying the weight of her choice. Laura paused once, gripping the back of a chair, her vision blurring. She wanted to run back, to refuse everything else, to stay. But Jacob and Hannah were waiting. The farm was waiting. Food was waiting. Or it wouldn't be if she lost the job now. She signed one last form and stepped outside into the cold. The bus ride back felt unreal. Laura sat rigidly, replaying Lucas's face in her mind, his voice asking her to promise. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She ignored it. By the time she reached the farmhouse, night had fallen again. Jacob met her at the door, his eyes searching her face. "He's staying in the hospital," she said. Jacob nodded slowly. "Is he okay?" "He will be," Laura said. "But he has to stay." Hannah came forward and wrapped her arms around Laura's waist, holding on tightly. Later, when the children slept, Laura sat alone at the table, the house quiet around her. Guilt pressed down on her chest until breathing felt difficult. She had left her child in a hospital bed. She pressed her palms flat against the wood, grounding herself. Tomorrow she would go to work. After that, she would return to the hospital. She would do both, no matter what it took, because there was no other choice. And that, more than anything, broke her heart. Laura did not wait long before calling. She stepped outside the farmhouse, pulling her coat tight against the cold, and walked until the house was out of sight. Snow crunched beneath her boots, the sound sharp in the quiet evening. The sky had darkened early, heavy with low clouds, and the road stretched empty in both directions. She stopped near the bus stop sign at the edge of the lane, a thin metal post barely visible beneath frost. Her fingers shook as she took out her phone. Robert answered on the second ring. "What is it now?" he said, his voice flat, impatient. "Lucas is in the hospital," Laura said. She did not raise her voice. She did not soften it either. "He has pneumonia. They admitted him." There was a pause on the line. Laura held her breath, waiting for something, concern, surprise, even anger. Instead, Robert laughed quietly. "So," he said, "kids get sick." "He needs a parent with him," Laura said. "I can't stay overnight. I just started working. I need you to come." Another pause, this one shorter. "I'm not dropping everything because you can't manage," Robert replied. "You chose this." "This isn't about me," Laura said. "This is about your son." Robert sighed, the same irritated exhale she had heard the night before. "You're exaggerating. You always do. You want to make me feel guilty." Laura closed her eyes. "I'm not asking for money," she said. "I'm asking you to sit with him." "I have a job," Robert snapped. "I'm not calling in sick because you decided to play martyr." The words settled heavily between them. "So that's it?" Laura asked. "That's it," Robert said. "You wanted independence. Now you have it. Learn to live with it." There was no anger in his voice now, only certainty, the kind that came from believing he had already won. Laura felt something inside her give way, not with pain, but with clarity. "You don't get to speak to me like this anymore," she said quietly. "Oh, don't be dramatic," Robert replied. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." She ended the call. The silence afterward was absolute. Laura stood still, the phone warm in her hand, listening to the wind move through the fields. She waited for the familiar rush of grief, for rage, for the urge to call back and say something sharper, something that would wound him the way he had wounded her. None of it came. Instead, there was a strange lightness, as if something heavy had finally been set down. She slipped the phone into her pocket and turned toward the road. A bus approached slowly in the distance, its headlights dull through the falling snow. Laura stepped closer to the curb and waited. The bus was nearly empty. She sat near the window, her reflection faint against the glass. As the bus pulled away, the farmhouse disappeared behind a curtain of snow. For the first time since the call, she allowed herself to think clearly. Robert was not coming. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever. He was not confused. He was not overwhelmed. He had made a decision, and he was comfortable with it. That knowledge hurt, but it also freed her. Laura rested her forehead against the cold glass. She thought of Lucas in his hospital bed, of Jacob shoveling snow without complaint, of Hannah holding everything together in her quiet way. She thought of herself, standing at a crossroads she had not chosen but would have to navigate alone. The bus rattled along the road, each stop marked by a brief hiss of brakes and a wash of cold air. No one sat beside her. No one asked where she was going. When she finally stepped off, the night had grown colder. Laura stood for a moment, orienting herself, then began to walk back toward the farmhouse. Her steps were slow but steady. She understood something now that she had not fully grasped before. Robert had not just abandoned her. He had abandoned his role, and with that abandonment he had also forfeited his power over her. Laura did not need his permission. She did not need his approval. She did not need his help. The path ahead was narrow and uncertain, but it was hers. By the time she reached the farmhouse, her decision had settled fully in her chest. She would work. She would care for her children. She would visit Lucas every day, no matter how tired she became. She would not beg. She closed the door behind her and locked it, the sound final and clean. The severance was complete. Laura did not go straight back to the farmhouse after leaving the bus. Instead, she walked toward the small cemetery at the edge of the village, the path familiar beneath her feet despite the years she had spent away. Snow covered the ground evenly, softening the outlines of headstones and fences, muting the world into quiet gray and white. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the sound sharp in the still air. Her grandfather's grave lay near the back, under an old oak that no longer held leaves in winter. Laura stopped a few steps away, suddenly unsure what to say. She had not come here when she first arrived. There had been no time for memory then, no space for grief. "I'm sorry," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have come sooner." The stone was cold beneath her fingers. She brushed snow away, revealing the carved name she knew by heart. Images rose unbidden. Her grandfather at the workbench, his hand steady as he shaped wood, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen, the quiet certainty of a man who fixed what was broken without making a spectacle of it. She was still standing there when footsteps crunched behind her. Laura turned, startled. The man stopped several feet away, as if sensing the weight of the moment. He was tall, his coat dusted with snow, his hair threaded with gray at the temples. For a second, she did not recognize him. Then he smiled, tentative and familiar all at once. "Laura," he said. Her breath caught. "Thomas." He nodded. "It's been a long time." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The past hovered between them, not as pain, but as unfinished thought. "I didn't expect to see you here," Laura said finally. "I moved back last year," Thomas replied. "I work at the hospital in the city now. When I heard your grandfather was buried here, I thought I'd come by." Laura studied his face, searching for traces of the boy she had once known. They were still there, softened by time but unmistakable. "I should have listened," she said quietly. "Back then." Thomas shook his head. "I should have come back sooner. I didn't handle things well." The words settled easily between them. No accusations, no explanations stretched thin by years of resentment, just acknowledgement. They walked together, toward the gate, the silence comfortable now. "Lucas is my son," Laura said, surprising herself with how easily the truth came. "He's in the hospital. Pneumonia." Thomas stopped. "Which ward?" "Third floor. Pediatrics." He nodded, professional instinct overtaking surprise. "I'll check on him tomorrow." "Not as a favor," he added gently. "As a doctor." Laura looked at him, something warm and cautious stirring in her chest. "Thank you." They parted without promises. The days that followed found their rhythm. Laura worked. She visited Lucas every evening. her exhaustion dissolving the moment she stepped into his room. He grew stronger, quickly, his smile returning, his cough fading into memory. The nurses greeted Laura with familiarity now, their nods steady and respectful. Thomas kept his word. He checked in when he could, never intruding, never asking for more than Laura was ready to give. He spoke to Lucas about cartoons and snow, about how lungs healed, about patience. At the farmhouse, life settled into something stable. Jacob continued working for neighbors. Hannah took on small responsibilities without complaint. The stove burned reliably now. The house felt less watchful, more willing. One evening, Laura stood at the table, counting the small stack of bills she had earned that week. It was not much, but it was enough. She thought of Robert, not with anger but with distance. His control had depended on her fear. Without it, his power had withered quietly. No confrontation followed. No dramatic reckoning. Justice had arrived in smaller forms. Lucas came home. The children laughed again. Laura slept through the night. On a clear afternoon weeks later, Laura stood on the porch as Thomas helped Jacob carry firewood inside. She watched without rushing forward, without retreating either. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt open. Laura closed the door behind her and returned to the warmth of the house, carrying with her what she had lost and what she had found.